You never expect to hear words like that from someone you've spent half your life with. But there she was, sitting across from me at the dining table, her hands nervously tracing the edge of her wine glass. The same hands I held on our wedding day. She looked up, her voice calm but carrying enough weight to crush me in an instant. "I love you," she began, and I felt myself relax just slightly, until she followed it with, "But I think I need to try being with other men." I blinked, like my brain just refused to process what she said. "What?" "I've been with you since I was 17, she said, her tone eerily casual, like we were discussing trying a new restaurant. "I'm 35 now. I don't know who I am outside of this relationship. I feel like I missed out on, I don't know, living." I stared at her, searching for the punchline, for any sign this was some twisted joke. But her eyes were steady, and that's when the floor fell out from under me. "You're joking?" I said, half laughing, though my chest felt like it was caving in. "I'm not," she said, softer now, like she was trying to be gentle, like that would somehow make this okay. "I think we should live apart for a while, just to figure things out. I'll come back. Eventually." "Eventually?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You think you'll come back? What the hell does that mean?" She sighed and leaned back in her chair, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm not saying I don't love you. I'm just saying, I need space, to see what else is out there." "Space." I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing in the room. "We're not roommates. We're married. This isn't something you take a break from, like a goddamn gym membership." "Don't yell at me," she snapped, her calm demeanor cracking for the first time. "This isn't easy for me either." "Oh, really? You're the one throwing our marriage out the window, and I'm supposed to feel bad for you?" She shook her head, her jaw tightening. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm asking for something I need. Why can't you just support me in this?" I laughed bitterly. "Support you? You want me to cheer you on while you sleep around? Are you out of your mind?" Her face flushed with anger. "That's not what this is about. You don't understand how trapped I've felt. How much I've given up." "Trapped?" I interrupted, my voice cold now. "You think I haven't given anything up for you? For this life we built together?" Silence. The kind that presses down on you, makes it hard to breathe. "I don't want to fight," she finally said, her voice trembling. I need to do this. For me. And I'm hoping you'll still be here when I figure it out." "Figure what out?" I asked, my hands trembling now, my anger giving way to something worse. "Whether you love me, whether I'm enough." She didn't answer. That silence said more than anything she could have said. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If you leave," I said, my voice low, "don't think for a second you can just come back like nothing happened. You don't get to have it both ways." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't argue. She just sat there, her hands still clutching that damn wine glass. "I'm not leaving yet," she said finally. "We need to talk this through, figure out how." I didn't let her finish. "Don't bother," I said, walking out of the room. "You've already made your choice." The night didn't end after I walked out of the room. How could it? I stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind me, but the walls felt paper-thin. Her words followed me, echoing in my head like a cruel joke on repeat. I need to try being with other men. What the hell was that supposed to mean? How long had she been feeling this way? Had she already acted on it? My mind raced, bouncing between rage, confusion, and a sickening sense of betrayal. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to calm down, but my chest felt like it was about to explode. The idea of her with someone else, of her even thinking about someone else, made my stomach turn. And then it hit me. Had this already started? I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. I didn't want to be that guy, but she'd forced my hand. If she had nothing to hide, then fine. But something in her tone earlier, like she wasn't telling the whole story, had me on edge. I pulled up her social media first. She wasn't the type to post a lot, but I scanned her recent updates for anything unusual. A new friend commenting on her photos. A weird tag. Nothing. It all looked normal. Too normal. Then I went to her texts. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the list of names. Most were familiar friends, family, work contacts. But then I saw one, Eric. I froze. Eric? Who the hell was Eric? It wasn't a name I recognized, and judging by the frequency of their messages, it wasn't someone casual. The thread had no subject, just a gray circle where a profile photo should have been. I hesitated for a second before opening it. What I saw made my blood run cold. Messages. Flirty. Casual on the surface but loaded with subtext. Plans to meet for drinks. Little inside jokes. And then one message from her, sent just a week ago, that stopped me dead. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. Last night. I clenched the phone so hard I thought I might break it. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. She hadn't just been thinking about other men. She'd already done it. I don't even remember standing up, but suddenly I was at the top of the stairs, yelling her name. Claire! She didn't answer, so I stormed down, finding her still sitting at the dining table. Her glass of wine was empty now, and she had her head in her hands. She looked up when I approached, her eyes puffy like she'd been crying. "What is it?" she asked, her voice weary. "What is it?" I spat, my voice shaking. "Who the hell is Eric?" Her face went pale. For a split second I thought she might try to deny it, to lie her way out of this. But instead, she just sighed. How did I what? Find out you've been screwing around behind my back?" I cut her off. "Not that hard when you leave a trail of texts for me to find." She flinched but held my gaze. "It's not what you think," she said, her tone defensive now. "Really? Because it looks like you've been meeting him, Claire. Looks like you've been lying to me while I've been up here playing the clueless husband. It wasn't supposed to go this far," she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. "It just happened. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Cheating doesn't just happen, Claire. You made a choice. Multiple choices, apparently." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she snapped, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "I didn't plan for this, okay? I've been so unhappy, and I didn't know how to tell you." "Unhappy?" I repeated, my voice breaking. "You couldn't talk to me about it? You couldn't give me the chance to fix things before running off to screw someone else?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't done. "And what was your plan here, huh? To keep me in the dark while you figure things out? Or was Eric just supposed to be a warm-up before you started sampling the whole damn menu?" "That's not fair," she shot back, her voice rising. "You think this is easy for me? You think I'm just having the time of my life? I'm trying to figure out who I am after spending my entire adult life as someone's wife." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. "You've had years to figure that out," I said quietly. "And you didn't need to destroy us to do it." She wiped at her face, her expression crumbling. "I don't know how to fix this." For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. The woman who, apparently, had been living a life I didn't even recognize. "I don't think you can," I said finally, my voice hollow. "Not this time." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face. First as the woman I'd spent years building a life with, then as the stranger who'd ripped it apart with just a few words. The memory of her text to Eric burned in my mind, a poison I couldn't shake. Last night was amazing. I sat on the couch in the living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. The silence was deafening, but I didn't dare turn on the TV or my phone. I just stared into the dark, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. By morning, I had my answer. I heard her footsteps on the stairs before I saw her. She walked into the living room, her hair tied back messily, wearing the same clothes as the night before. She stopped when she saw me sitting there. "You didn't come to bed," she said softly, like she cared. I didn't respond. I just looked at her, my expression cold. She shifted uncomfortably, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "We need to talk." "Oh, now you want to talk?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Funny, you didn't seem interested in talking when you were busy screwing Eric. Her face twisted with a mix of guilt and frustration. Can we not do this first thing in the morning? No, Claire, I said, standing up. We're doing this now. You owe me the truth. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked small, like the weight of what she'd done was finally catching up to her. What do you want to know? I stepped closer, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. How long has this been going on? She hesitated. A few months. I felt the air leave my lungs. Months? Jesus Christ, Claire. I didn't mean for it to. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare say it just happened. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. So what? You'd come home to me, kiss me goodnight, and then go meet him the next day? Was that the plan? She flinched at the venom in my words. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Enlighten me. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't feel like myself anymore. With him, it was different. I felt alive. I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that the cliché you're going for? Did he make you feel young and exciting while I was at home paying the bills and being boring old me? That's not fair, she said, her voice rising. You think I wanted this? You think I woke up one day and decided to ruin everything? I didn't. But I couldn't keep pretending I was happy when I wasn't. Pretending, I repeated, shaking my head. Wow, all those years, all those moments we shared, and now you're telling me it was all pretend. No, she shouted, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't pretend. But somewhere along the way I started losing myself, and I didn't know how to stop it. Eric. He just reminded me of who I used to be. Her words were like knives, cutting me deeper with each syllable. I wanted to yell, to scream, to throw something, but all I could do was stand there, shaking with anger and disbelief. So what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You've had your fun. Do you just pack up and leave? Or do you expect me to sit here and wait while you find yourself with him? I don't know, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know what I want right now. That was the moment it hit me. She wasn't confused. She wasn't lost. She was selfish. She wanted to have it both ways. The safety of me and the thrill of him. Well, I'll make it easy for you, I said, my tone ice cold. You don't have to decide. Because I'm done. Her eyes widened. You don't mean that. Oh, I mean every word, I said, stepping past her. You want to figure out who you are? Fine. Do it without me. I grabbed my keys off the counter and headed for the door. Where are you going? She called after me, panic creeping into her voice. I turned back, looking at her one last time. Anywhere but here. I slammed the door behind me, the sound reverberating through the house. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I could breathe. I drove aimlessly for hours that morning, trying to burn off the adrenaline and rage that had taken over me. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight they ached, but I didn't care. The world outside the car windows blurred into a haze of gray clouds and empty roads. How did we even get here? How does 18 years together end like this, with lies, betrayal, and a stranger named Eric? I eventually ended up at an old diner we used to go to back when we were broke and in love. The kind of place with sticky tabletops and coffee that tasted like burnt water. It was empty except for a couple of truckers in the corner, and for once, I appreciated the quiet. I sat in the booth, staring at a menu I didn't plan to order from, my thoughts a jumbled mess. All I could see was her face, those tears in her eyes when I walked out. For a split second, I'd almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I'd remembered the texts, the months of deception, and the way she just sat there and admitted it all like she was confessing to stealing a candy bar instead of gutting our marriage. I wasn't ready to go back home, but I couldn't sit in that diner forever. Eventually, I found myself back in the car, parked outside a gym I hadn't stepped into in years. The idea of pounding out my frustration on a punching bag felt better than brooding alone. As I worked through a set of half-assed reps, my phone buzzed on the bench next to me. I glanced at the screen. It was her, Claire. I ignored it, tossing the phone into my bag. But then it buzzed again, and again. Finally, I grabbed it, frustration boiling over. Her texts were short, apologetic. Claire, we need to talk. Claire, I'm sorry for how I said things. Claire, please don't shut me out. I stared at the messages, my thumb hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to respond, to unleash the firestorm of anger building inside me. Another part of me, the smaller, quieter part, wanted answers. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove home, half hoping she'd be gone when I got there. But of course, she wasn't. When I walked through the door, the house felt suffocatingly quiet. Her purse was on the kitchen counter, her phone face down next to it. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking up as I came in. "You came back," she said, her voice cautious, like she wasn't sure which version of me had walked through the door. "Not for you," I shot back, dropping my keys on the counter. She flinched, but to her credit, she didn't cry. Instead, she stood up, folding the blanket neatly before placing it on the armrest. "Can we just talk? Please. Talk," I scoffed. "You want to talk now? After months of lying to my face?" Her shoulders sagged, but she stepped closer. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand where I'm coming from." "Oh, I understand," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You were bored. You wanted excitement. And instead of working through it, you decided to screw around behind my back. That's not fair," she snapped, her tone defensive. "It wasn't just about excitement. I felt invisible. For years, it was like we were just existing, like roommates." My jaw tightened. "So what? Instead of talking to me, you ran off to Eric for validation?" "I didn't run off," she said, her voice rising. "I tried, but you didn't see it. Every time I tried to bring up how I felt, you'd brush me off. It was always about your work, your stress, your life. I stopped feeling like your wife and started feeling like a convenience." I opened my mouth to argue, but her words hit something raw inside me. Had I really been that blind? "So what now?" I asked after a long silence. "What do you expect me to do with all of this?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I just know I don't want to lose you completely. I want to figure this out, but I can't do it if we're just tearing each other apart." "You should have thought of that before you let him touch you," I said coldly. Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might collapse right there. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at me with tears in her eyes. "I can't take back what I did," she said softly, "but I can try to fix it. If you'll let me." I laughed bitterly. "Fix it? How, Claire? Are you going to unscrew Eric? Are you going to erase the months you spent lying to my face? Tell me how, because I'd love to hear it." She didn't answer, and that silence said more than words ever could. I couldn't take it anymore. The sight of her standing there, trying to justify the unjustifiable, was too much. I turned and headed upstairs, leaving her behind. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I could hear her pacing downstairs, her muffled voice carrying up through the floor as she argued with herself. Or maybe she was just trying to calm down. I didn't care. I locked the bedroom door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands. This was it. The breaking point. No more talking. No more tears. No more trying to salvage something she'd already torched to the ground. Then I heard it. The faint chime of her phone vibrating downstairs. It wasn't unusual, but something about the timing felt wrong. I stood and moved to the bedroom door, cracking it open just enough to listen. A soft click of her phone unlocking. Her voice, low but strained. "Hey, I can't talk right now." Every muscle in my body tensed. "No, he's home," she said, her voice dropping even further. "I'll call you later." My heart thundered in my chest. There it was. Proof that she wasn't just remorseful or confused. She was still talking to him. Still keeping him in the loop while standing in our home, pretending to care about fixing things. Without thinking, I bolted down the stairs, taking them two at a time. She was sitting on the couch, phone still in her hand, and the look on her face when she saw me was all the confirmation I needed. "Who was that?" I demanded, my voice a dangerous growl. She froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. It was no one. "Don't lie to me, Claire," I roared, grabbing the phone out of her hands. "Give it back," she shouted, reaching for it, but I held it out of her grasp. I unlocked it. She hadn't even bothered to change her password, and scrolled to the call log. Eric. His name sat at the top, the call only a minute old. "You're unbelievable," I said, tossing the phone onto the couch. "It's not what you think," she cried, tears already spilling down her face. "I was telling him it's over, that I can't do this anymore." "Do you honestly think I'm that stupid?" I snapped, stepping closer. "You've been lying to me for months, Claire. Months. Why the hell would I believe you now?" She didn't answer, just stood there crying like a victim, like she was the one who'd been hurt. "Say something," I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. "What do you want me to say?" She screamed back, her tears turning into fury. "That I'm a horrible person? That I messed up? Fine. I did. But you're not perfect either. Okay? You've been checked out of this marriage for years. That's not an excuse to cheat," I bellowed, my hands shaking with the effort it took not to punch a hole in the wall. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. I needed something you weren't giving me. And I know that's selfish, but it's the truth." "Something I wasn't giving you?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "Like what? Tension? Love? Because, Claire, I gave you everything I had. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but I was here. I was committed. Can you say the same?" Her silence was deafening. "That's what I thought," I said, my voice cold now. "You can cry all you want, but you don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to act like this is my fault." She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, over and over again, like it was some kind of magic spell that would erase what she'd done. But it wasn't enough. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, grabbing my jacket off the back of a chair. "Where are you going?" she asked, looking up with red, tear-streaked eyes. "Away from you," I said, heading for the door. "Please," she called after me, her voice breaking. "Don't go. Not like this." I stopped, hand on the doorknob, and turned to look at her one last time. "Like this," I said, my voice bitter. "This is exactly how you made it, Claire. Remember that." I slammed the door behind me, the sound reverberating through the house like a final blow. I didn't have a plan when I left the house that night, just a burning need to get away from her, from everything that had suddenly become so toxic. I drove aimlessly again, the streets dark and nearly empty. The cold air bit at my face through the cracked window, but it did nothing to cool the fire in my chest. I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the neon vacancy sign flickers, and the receptionist doesn't ask questions. I paid in cash and didn't bother unpacking the overnight bag I'd grabbed from the trunk. The room was depressing. Stale cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains, a TV that buzzed with static when turned on, but it didn't matter. At least I wasn't in that house. I lay on the lumpy bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the last few days like some twisted highlight reel. Her confession, the texts, her excuses, and now this separation which felt less like a break and more like the beginning of the end. By morning, I still hadn't slept, but I knew I couldn't avoid reality forever. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But when I saw it wasn't her, thank God, it pulled me back to life. It was my friend Dan. We hadn't spoken in months, but I figured if anyone could give me some perspective, it'd be him. "Hey man," I said, trying to sound casual. "Whoa, you sound like hell," he replied. "What's going on?" I hesitated for a second, then decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. "Claire and we're taking a break. She's been seeing someone else." The line went silent for a moment. "Shit," he said finally. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. Yeah, well, rough doesn't even begin to cover it. Do you want to grab a beer or something? Talk it out. I almost said no. I wasn't sure I could stomach talking about it any more than I already had. But sitting alone in a dingy motel room wasn't exactly helping. Yeah, I said finally. That sounds good. Later that evening, I met Dan at a bar we used to frequent in our younger, dumber years. The place hadn't changed much. Same sticky floors, same questionable jukebox selection. It felt almost comforting in its familiarity. We sat in a corner booth, a couple of beers between us. Dan listened quietly as I spilled everything, from Claire's confession to the fight to walking out. Damn, he said when I finally stopped talking. She really said she'd come back eventually? Like you're just supposed to wait around? Yep, I said bitterly, taking a long swig of my beer. Like some backup plan she can pick up whenever she feels like it. He shook his head. That's messed up, man. You don't deserve that. No kidding. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of clinking glasses and muted laughter filling the space between us. So, what's next? Dan asked. You going back home? I shrugged. Not yet. I can't face her right now. Every time I look at her, all I see is him. Eric, right? What's his deal? I don't know, I admitted. Some guy she met at work, apparently. I didn't exactly stick around to hear his life story. Dan frowned, his fingers drumming on the table. You ever think about looking into him? I mean, if he's messing with your wife, maybe he's not the stand-up guy she thinks he is. I hadn't considered that. Up until now, all my anger had been directed at Claire. But Dan had a point. This Eric guy had waltzed into my life and blown it up without a second thought. Who the hell was he? Anyway, maybe, I said slowly. It's not like I've got much else to do right now. Dan smirked. Well, if you need a wingman for some recon, you know where to find me. I chuckled despite myself. I'll keep that in mind. That night, back in the motel, I couldn't stop thinking about what Dan had said. The idea of learning more about Eric wasn't just tempting, it was intoxicating. I pulled out my laptop and opened a search engine. It didn't take long to find him. Claire wasn't exactly subtle about using his real name in her messages. His profile popped up quickly. Clean cut, mid-30s, good job, active social life. On the surface, he looked like the kind of guy you'd trust to water your plants while you were on vacation. But I wasn't buying it. Something about him felt too polished, too perfect. And the more I scrolled, the angrier I got. Who the hell was he to step into my life, my marriage, and act like he had any right to be there? I stared at his smiling profile picture, a storm brewing in my chest. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I checked out of the motel. I couldn't stay there forever, and something about sleeping in a bed that felt like a crime scene wasn't helping. As much as I hated the idea, I went back to the house. The moment I walked in, the weight of it all hit me again. Her scent lingered in the air, her shoes by the door, her jacket on the back of the chair. For a brief, stupid second, I thought about tossing it all into a pile and setting it on fire. But then I heard her voice. Hey, Claire said softly, standing at the top of the stairs. She was in one of my old hoodies, her face pale and tired. I ignored her, walking straight past the living room and into the kitchen. I opened the fridge and grabbed a beer, even though it wasn't even noon yet. Are you just going to keep ignoring me? She asked, following me. I cracked the beer open and took a long sip before answering. What do you want, Claire? I want to talk, she said, her voice trembling. I want to make this right. I set the bottle down on the counter, turning to face her. You don't get to make it right. Not after what you've done. She flinched but didn't back down. I know I messed up, okay? But I still love you. Doesn't that mean anything? Love. I laughed bitterly. You've got a funny way of showing it. Or is that just what you told Eric while you were crawling into his bed? Her face turned red, but she didn't say anything. That's what I thought, I said, grabbing my beer and heading upstairs to the guest room. I needed space even if it was just a door between us. Later that night, after hours of staring at the ceiling, I found myself back at my laptop, staring at Eric's picture again. He didn't look threatening. If anything, he looked like the kind of guy who drives a sensible car and gets excited about weekend hikes. But something about his clean-cut image didn't sit right with me. I clicked deeper into his profile, digging through old posts, tagged pictures, anything that might give me insight into who this guy really was. And then I found it. A comment thread from a few years ago, buried under a picture of him with some friends. It was nothing out of the ordinary, until I saw a user call him out for being a lying piece of shit who destroys families. The comment had been deleted, but not before someone replied, "Guess some things never change, huh?" I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Was this guy a serial cheater? Had he done this before? I copied the usernames and opened another search tab, determined to follow the trail. By the time the sun came up, I'd pieced together a rough picture of Eric's past. There were whispers in local forums, vague references to messy breakups, and one particularly damning post from someone claiming he'd ruined their marriage. The post was old, but it hit close to home. The person described Eric as manipulative, charming, and completely incapable of respecting boundaries. They claimed he had an uncanny ability to make people feel special, only to leave chaos in his wake. I sat back, the pieces falling into place. This wasn't just about Claire and me anymore. This guy was a predator, someone who thrived on breaking what wasn't his. And now he'd set his sights on my wife. I spent the next day stewing, trying to figure out what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to confront Eric directly, to show up at his door and let him know exactly what I thought of him. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I called Dan. "You're really going to do this?" he asked when I explained my plan. "Damn right I am," I said, pacing the living room. "This guy's done this before. He's not just some random fling. He's a goddamn homewrecker." "All right," Dan said, his voice hesitant. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" I didn't answer. That evening, I parked a few blocks away from Eric's house. It had taken me all of 15 minutes to find his address. Claire's phone wasn't exactly Fort Knox. I sat in the car, watching the lights in his windows. The house was modest but well-kept, the kind of place you'd never associate with someone who made a habit of tearing lives apart. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I watched a figure move inside. Was that him? Was that the guy who'd been texting my wife, whispering in her ear, making her think our life wasn't enough? The door opened, and I saw him for the first time. He was taller than I'd expected, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing a button-down shirt like he'd just come from work. He stepped out onto the porch, phone in hand, completely unaware that I was sitting there, watching him. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about getting back at him. This was about taking back control. I started the car, the engine rumbling to life. This wasn't over. Not yet. The next day, I dove deeper into what I was now calling Operation Eric. It wasn't just about satisfying my curiosity anymore. It was about understanding exactly what kind of person had walked into my marriage and set it on fire. I didn't tell Claire what I was doing. We barely spoke anyway. And when we did, it was clipped sentences filled with bitterness. She had no idea I'd spent the night parked outside Eric's house, watching him like some second-rate detective. I couldn't shake the image of him standing on that porch, calm and collected, like he hadn't wrecked someone's life. My life. But now I was done sitting on the sidelines. That afternoon, I decided to test the waters. I created a fake social media profile, a faceless account with a generic name and a blank photo. I sent him a friend request, half expecting him to ignore it. But to my surprise, he accepted within an hour. Amateur move, Eric. His profile didn't give much away, but I knew how to dig. I started liking old posts, leaving harmless comments, building a presence. He didn't seem suspicious. If anything, he seemed flattered by the attention. After a few days, I took it a step further. I sent him a private message. "Hey, saw your post about the hiking trail. Looks like a cool spot. You go there often." It was a harmless icebreaker, and I wasn't sure he'd respond. But a few hours later, he did. "Eric, yeah, it's one of my favorite places. Are you into hiking?" I smirked. He had no idea who he was talking to. "Me, a little. always looking for new spots to check out. Any recommendations? We went back and forth for a while, talking about outdoor stuff I didn't actually care about. The more we chatted, the more I realized just how smooth he was. Every message was casual, friendly, but with just enough charm to make you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world. No wonder Claire fell for it. A week later, I took things further. I started tracking his movements, not in a creepy stalker way or so I told myself, but enough to piece together his routine. I knew what time he left for work, when he came home, even where he liked to grab coffee in the mornings. It wasn't hard to figure out where Claire fit into his schedule. Every Thursday, like clockwork, he left work an hour early and headed to a bar across town. I'd followed him once, parking across the street and watching as he sat in a booth, sipping whiskey and scrolling through his phone. Was this where they met? Was this their place? The thought made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. Not yet. Then came the breakthrough. One night, while digging through his old posts, I found a picture of him at a company holiday party. He was standing next to a woman, her arm looped around his, both of them smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. At first, I thought she was just a coworker, but then I noticed the caption, "Celebrating another great year with the best partner I could ask for. Red heart. Partner?" I clicked her profile and started scrolling. Her name was Melissa, and she had no shortage of posts about their life together. Weekend trips, family gatherings, even a post about adopting a dog last year. Eric wasn't just some single guy playing the field. He was engaged. The discovery hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about Claire and me anymore. This guy had a whole other life, a fiancé who probably had no idea what he was up to. I stared at Melissa's profile picture, a smiling woman with kind eyes and a golden retriever by her side. Did she know who she was marrying? Did she have any clue what kind of person Eric really was? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just my fight anymore. The next morning, I called Dan. "You're not going to believe this," I said, pacing the living room. "What now?" he asked, already sounding exasperated. "Eric's engaged." There was a long pause. "You're kidding." "I wish I was. I found her online. She has no idea he's been screwing around." Dan let out a low whistle. "Damn. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "But she deserves to know the truth. Someone's got to stop this guy." "Just be careful," Dan warned. "If this blows up, it could get messy. For everyone." I knew he was right, but I didn't care. Eric had played his game long enough. It was time for someone to turn the tables. Took me 3 days to work up the nerve to contact Melissa. Every time I stared at her profile picture, I felt a twinge of guilt. She looked happy, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath her perfect little life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that she deserved to know the truth. Someone had to pull back the curtain on Eric's lies, and if it wasn't going to be me, then who? Finally, I typed out a message. "Hi Melissa. I don't know how to say this, but I think there's something you need to know about Eric. It's important. Please message me back when you can." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The waiting was agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, only to see a spam email or some useless notification. When her reply finally came, my heart raced. "Melissa. Who is this? What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath and typed back. My name's protagonist's name. Eric's been seeing my wife behind your back. I have proof." The dots indicating she was typing appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. Then they came back, disappeared again. Finally, her response came through. "Melissa, this is a sick joke. Who put you up to this?" It's not a joke. I can send you screenshots." I attached a couple of the texts I'd found between Eric and Claire, along with a time-stamped photo of him at the bar where they'd been meeting. The proof was undeniable. Took her a few minutes to respond, and when she did, her tone had shifted completely. "Melissa, I need to talk to you. In person." We met the next evening at a coffee shop halfway between her place and mine. Melissa was already seated when I arrived, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck even though the cafe was warm. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She didn't look like the smiling woman from her profile picture anymore. "You're him," she said as I sat down. "Yeah," I said, my voice heavy. "And you're her." For a moment we just sat there, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. "Show me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I'd created, laying it on the table in front of her. The texts, the photos, the timestamps, it was all there. She lingered around the edges of the house, trying to stay out of my way. I could feel her watching me, though, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. I didn't give her the chance. It wasn't until late that evening that things came to a head. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels without actually watching anything, when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She was upstairs, so I glanced at the screen. The name Eric flashed across it, along with a preview of the message. "We need to talk. Melissa knows everything." My blood turned to ice. I stared at the phone, the words burning into my brain. He wasn't supposed to be reaching out to her. Not after Melissa confronted him. Not after everything that had come to light. Without thinking, I grabbed the phone and stormed upstairs. "Claire!" I yelled, throwing the door to the bedroom open. She jumped, startled, and turned to face me. "What is it?" I held up the phone. "What the hell is this?" Her face paled as she saw the screen. "Give me that," she said, reaching for it. I pulled it back. "No, you don't get to keep hiding." What did he mean? Melissa knows everything. Did she confront him? And why is he still messaging you? "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Oh, really? Because it looks exactly like what I think," I snapped. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Melissa showed up at his office today. She told him she knew about us, about everything. And," I demanded. "And now he's panicking," she admitted. "He thinks she's going to call off the wedding, and he wanted to, I don't know, explain himself to me." "Explain himself?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Are you seriously telling me he's trying to make you feel better while his fiancé's life is falling apart?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. "You're unbelievable," I said, tossing the phone onto the bed. "The two of you deserve each other." She flinched but quickly recovered, anger flashing in her eyes. "This isn't just on me, you know," she snapped. "You're acting like I'm the only one who screwed up, but maybe if you'd paid more attention to me." "Don't you dare," I interrupted, stepping closer. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. I wasn't the one sneaking around. I wasn't the one lying to your face." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it was like. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter anymore. Eric made me feel alive." "Alive?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call it? Because it looks a lot more like selfishness to me." "Maybe it was," she said, her voice breaking. "Maybe I was selfish. But I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to fix us." "Fix us?" I shouted. "You didn't even try, Claire. You just ran to the first guy who gave you attention. And now you're standing here, acting like you're the victim in all of this." "I'm not," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not the victim, but neither are you. We both let this happen." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I shook my head, backing away. "No, Claire, you let this happen. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it." I spent the rest of the night downstairs, nursing a bottle of whiskey and trying to block out the sound of her crying upstairs. But no matter how much I drank, I couldn't escape the reality of what my life had become. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. Later that morning, I called Melissa. "I need to know," I said when she picked up. "How did it go with Eric?" She hesitated, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then she sighed. "It went about as well as you'd expect," she said. "He tried to lie at first, but I had the proof. He admitted it eventually. And I called off the wedding," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm done with him." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Good. You deserve better. So do you, she said softly. I hope you know that. Her words hit harder than I expected. Thanks, I said, my voice thick. Good luck, Melissa. You too, she said before hanging up. I stared at the phone in my hand, the weight of her words sinking in. I deserved better. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The days that followed were quiet but tense. Claire and I moved around each other like ghosts in the same house. Neither of us willing to take the first step toward anything. Conversation, resolution, or even closure. She tried once or twice, starting with tentative phrases like, I think we should, or we need to. But I wasn't ready. I couldn't stomach another argument that ended in tears and blame. Instead, I threw myself into reclaiming pieces of my life. The first thing I did was hit the gym again. It wasn't about revenge or looking good. It was about burning off the rage that had been simmering inside me for weeks. Every punch on the heavy bag felt like a release, a way to channel all the emotions I couldn't put into words. Then I started tackling projects around the house I'd been ignoring for years. Fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom, repainting the living room walls, clearing out the clutter in the garage. And as I worked, I realized something strange. I felt lighter. Not happy exactly. That was still a long way off. But there was a sense of purpose in the small things, a reminder that I was capable of building something, even if it wasn't the life I thought I'd have. It was during one of those garage cleaning sessions that I found an old box of memories. Photos, letters, little trinkets Claire and I had collected over the years. I sat on the cold cement floor, flipping through the pictures, seeing the two of us smiling and carefree. Vacations, holidays, random snapshots of our life together. Felt like looking at strangers. Who were those people? And how had they ended up here, in this mess of betrayal and broken trust? I found a card she'd written me on our 5th anniversary. Her handwriting was neat and deliberate, every word carefully chosen. I'm so lucky to have you, it read. You make me feel safe, loved, and understood in a way I didn't think was possible. Here's to the next 5 years, and the rest of our lives. I closed the card and stared at the wall, the words ringing hollow now. That life was gone. Those people were gone. And maybe that was okay. That night, I made a decision. When Claire came downstairs for dinner, I didn't avoid her this time. I sat at the table, waiting for her to join me. She hesitated, her eyes wary, but eventually sat across from me. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. She nodded, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Okay. I took a deep breath. This isn't working anymore. You and me. Whatever this is now, it's not healthy. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. I've spent weeks trying to figure out what went wrong, I continued. And I realized something. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it was me or you or both of us. What matters is that it's broken. And I don't think we can fix it. She wiped at her face, her voice barely above a whisper. So, what are you saying? I'm saying it's time to let go, I said, my throat tightening. For both of us. Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she nodded. I don't want to hurt you anymore, she said, her voice cracking. I don't want to keep pretending we can go back to the way things were. Neither do I admitted. We sat in silence, the weight of our decision settling over us. I think you should stay here, I said finally. At least until you figure out your next move. I'll find somewhere else. She looked up, startled. You don't have to do that. I do, I said firmly. I need a fresh start, Claire. We both do. She nodded again, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. Me too, I said. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it. That night, I started packing a bag. I didn't have a plan yet, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. As I zipped up the bag, I glanced at the mirror across the room. I didn't look like the man I used to be, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The next morning, I woke up early, the house still shrouded in a heavy silence. It felt strange, standing in what used to be my home, knowing it wouldn't be much longer. My bag was by the door, everything packed and ready. I wasn't taking much, just the essentials. I didn't need reminders of this place or the life that had unraveled here. Claire came downstairs as I was lacing up my shoes. Her eyes were puffy, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She looked at the bag, then at me, and for a second, I thought she might say something. But she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, wringing her hands, her expression a mixture of guilt and sadness. "You're really leaving," she said finally. "Yeah," I replied, standing up. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I hope you find what you're looking for." "I hope you do too," I said, my voice softer than I expected. We stood there for a moment, two people who used to know everything about each other, now barely holding a conversation. "I'll make sure the paperwork gets started," she said, her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have to deal with that." "Thanks," I said, and that was it. No grand goodbyes, no dramatic scenes. Just a quiet end to a chapter that had once been the most important part of my life. I drove for hours, not knowing where I was going but needing to put as much distance between myself and that house as possible. The road stretched out before me, endless and empty, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I ended up in a small coastal town, the kind of place where time seemed to move slower. The air was salty, the streets lined with quirky little shops and weathered buildings. It wasn't much, but it felt right. I rented a small apartment above a bookstore, a far cry from the life I'd left behind. It was simple, quiet, and exactly what I needed. Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild. I got a job at a local hardware store, fixing things and helping people with projects. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept my hands busy and my mind focused. One evening, after closing up, I wandered down to the beach. The sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The waves crashed against the shore, a steady rhythm that felt calming in its constancy. I stood there for a long time, watching the horizon, thinking about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak. It all felt distant now, like a storm that had passed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice startled me. I turned to see a woman standing a few feet away, her hands in the pockets of a windbreaker. She had a kind face, her hair blowing in the ocean breeze. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "It is." She smiled, stepping closer. "First time here?" "Something like that," I said, returning the smile. We started talking, small talk at first, but it quickly turned into something more. Her name was Lisa, and she'd lived in the town her whole life. She loved books, coffee, and the ocean, and there was a quiet strength in her that drew me in. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't think about Claire, or Eric, or everything I'd lost. I thought about what might come next. It wasn't a perfect ending. There was no sudden epiphany, no fairy tale resolution. But it was a beginning, and for now that was enough. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more dramatic and intriguing tales, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and helps bring more exciting content your way. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do in this situation? See you in the next story.